One of the major challenges that we faced from a costuming perspective for this season was undoubtedly Ben's toga. Of course, it's intended to be just a toga that he made out of a bedsheet, sort of in imitation of what Rob wears. So, of course, we thought, well, we'll just make the toga out of a bedsheet like it is. But it turned out that just pinning the sheet on Glenn in the toga fashion wasn't anywhere near as robust enough as was required for the rigors of production. We frequently had to pause in order to get the toga back on Glenn in something approximating an acceptable form. You can see it in all kinds of states of degradation throughout the show. And I only had one sheet for Ben's toga, and it was constantly getting dirty since we were outside in the park. I don't know how many times I threw that sheet in the washing machine while we were still on production to have it ready and clean for the next day. And now we introduce the lovely ladies of Yog-Sothoth. I don't know why they don't have brooms. For some reason, I didn't think of it. But I fixed that for Season 2 when we were going over all the costumes and props, and I was like, oh, the witches need brooms. So I made brooms for them for Season 2. The park that we're shooting in is really close to my house. It's just a small park in rural Alabama, and we decided to shoot it here because we were just looking for a place that was out of the way, without a lot of people, where we could just go and we could shoot this show. It's nice that it's close to my house, so if we forget something or need something, I can go and get it, but it is a bit out of the way for the other members of the cast and crew, so I always appreciate them coming down for it. It was so cold the day we shot this. It had already been cold and sometimes rainy during this whole production. We were trying to shoot this in like the only 2 weeks that we ended up having winter here in Alabama for this season. There was one day it was so cold that we actually called off shooting. Everybody had retreated to their cars to try to warm up, and not long after, Brianna and I made the call that we just got to send everybody home. The day we shot this episode was pretty close to that cold, but we powered through it and got it done. In between takes, people were putting on heavy coats, and Rachel and Mallory, who play the witches, were even wrapping themselves up in a really thick blanket. I think one of them might even been a sleeping bag, in between takes just to stay warm. I remember Brennan was also talking about what kind of color correction it took in order to get all of the, purple from the cold out of people's faces. It was brutal. I felt so bad for everybody, and especially the girls, since they were so cold. But it worked, we got it done, and I really appreciated everybody doing that. Rescheduling days can always be such a mess. Sometimes you have to do it, but it's so nice when you don't have to. And actually, the reason that we're underneath this big pavilion, I had forgotten, was because we had to move because it was so cold. On whatever day it was that we were shooting the first shot ever with the cultists under the pavilion, we had originally started at a different table. It was just a smaller picnic table, but that did have a pavilion over it. But there was no electricity down there. And it was so cold trying to shoot at that other table, we had to move someplace that had electrical plugs so we could plug in heaters to warm our hands up in between takes. So we ended up shooting that whole scene under this really large pavilion that has a bunch of tables on it that also has electricity. And so this table and this location under this major pavilion became the now iconic location where all of the cultists meet for coffee. This is an ad-libbed scene with Dax and Glenn. A few times while we were shooting the show, if we had a little extra time, we would just let the actors and actresses get into character, and we would do a little bit of improv.